All right. Let's start off by saying Barakatah Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem, Kudash. All right. Welcome to another live lesson. The name of this one is The Concept of Hell from an Etymological Perspective. And pretty much this is something I've been compiling probably for a few days, just kind of just thoughts that come into mind. And, sometimes you look stuff up, sometimes you ask certain questions. And this conversation is, I had with Chat GPT. But before I even went there, I actually just went to Google, was just asking certain questions about the word hell itself, just to see what it would give me. And found some good info. And at the end of the day, when you're dealing with the concept of hell from a religious perspective, it was pretty much set up for control. There's a movie that came out, Robin Hood. Don't remember the full title, if it's just Robin Hood or it had some other stuff to it. But you had Jamie Foxx in there, and pretty much there was a scene. I believe it was either towards the middle or maybe almost 3/4 of the way into the movie, where F. Murray Abram, who played like an archbishop or something like that, he was having a conversation with the dude, the cat that played Robin Hood. He was also in Kingsman, and pretty much he mentioned the word fear, and F. Murray Abrams said, fear, the greatest weapon in God's arsenal. That's why the church created hell. And pretty much that's what it's about. It's a fear tactic to get the people to conform to the clergy of the Roman Catholic Church as a form of control, to take over their goods, their lands, their resources, and to have them totally, solely subjugated to the Roman Catholic Church doctrine. And, this is why the Bible back then, which you have something called the Vulgate, which the word Vulgate means people, or, populace, which the populace of the people, common people, didn't speak the Latin. And while the Bible, like while they were doing their Latin and Greek, incantations, most people didn't speak those languages. So they were pretty much ignorant to what was going on. And their whole concept of the teachings of their religion were based off of the clergy and what they were pushing. And they were pushing bullshit. That's why when you go up until, I believe it was the 1400s into the 1500s, when the English Bible first started to be published, they were persecuting a lot of those individuals that were publishing it because they didn't want the common people to get, knowledge of what the scriptures really said, because if they did, then they'll be able to read it for themselves and find out that it's pretty much been nothing but a fraud. And that's pretty much what's happening right now in the information age. It's been coming out that the whole concept of hell is nothing but a fraud, especially when you view it in the lens of the actual etymology of those words. So just to get started, what I did was I asked it on Google. So I came to the chat with the same question. I said, what is the original meaning of the Greek word Hades? Notice I didn't say the definition. I said original meaning of the Greek word Hades, because if you said definition, it probably would have gave you, a place of damned or whatever. So I said the original meaning of the Greek word Hades or Hades comes from ancient Greek and can be broken down etymologically. Ha or a prefix meaning not or un. Right, so like you have the word Africa. Africa is a compound word, a frigus, which is is no or not, and frigus is where you get the word fridge or refrigerator, which means cold. Africa, not cold. So in Hades, is no or not, or un. And idion, a verb meaning to see. So pretty much the word literally means the unseen, which is what? The grave. When you bury someone underground or in a mausoleum, whatever, you don't see them. So they're unseen. And that's pretty much what the word means. It means unseen, right? So Hades literally means the unseen or invisible one. And that's pretty much what it means. So it says original context. As a name, Hades or Hades is the name of the Greek god of the underworld, right? Which is what? A myth, who ruled over the realm of the dead, right? So if this was an actual concept, and it was actually true, it would be written in the scriptures. There would be a dude named Hades or Hades that was the ruler of the realm of the dead. That's not mentioned in the scriptures. It says the name emphasizes his association. And when you read the book of Luke, the 16th chapter about Lazarus and the rich man, that's an actual parable, and the parable is a riddle form, so to speak, of what's going to happen to Esau in the kingdom of heaven. All right. The name emphasizes his association with the hidden, unseen world beneath the earth, right? Which is the place of the dead. And that's, as the prophet Job spoke about that he wanted just to die and just go be at peace. As a place, Hades also came to refer to the underworld itself, the shadowy realm where souls went after death. Distinct from the more neutral or sometimes even gloomy connotation it later acquired in Christian context. So it was a gloomy connotation that came later that was acquired by the Christian context. All right. When you read the Zondervan's Bible Dictionary, I don't think I have that saved. But when you go to the Compact Bible Dictionary, right? Let's see if we could do that. Let's see if it'll come up by chance. Zondervan's Compact Bible Dictionary. Let me get that. And then let's type in Gehenna. See what comes up. Usually, sometimes on the images, some brothers have over the years, just kind of highlighted certain, like if you type in Edom, it comes up. If you type in, I believe, Ham, it comes up. But I don't see Hades or Hades. All right. And I don't think I have. Because you could find it in PDF form. And you could find it online. Let's see. Let's go to all online free archives. Let's see what comes up. All right. It's just like a video type. It's not gonna. Let's see. Nah, it's not gonna come up. Yeah, so pretty much it says in Gehenna, what the origins of Gehenna is or was, and it goes into, and it says that later rabbinic writings, equated Gehenna with the entrance to hell. And it says later on hell itself. So pretty much this is something that has over time, been built up. So pretty much what it is a cunningly devised fable. As we're going to read, it doesn't say it like in that fashion, but there's a word that's used that gives us that concept. So it says, in short, Hades originally meant the invisible or unseen person, reflecting the mystery and hidden nature of death and the afterlife, right? So it had nothing to do with a place that you go and burn forever. So my next question, it says, what is the original meaning of the Hebrew word Sheol? I wrote it like that. The word is Sha'awal in the Hebrew. The original meaning of the Hebrew word Sheol, Sha'awal, as you see there, is a bit more nuanced and debated. But in its earliest and most basic sense, Sheol refers to the grave, the pit, or more broadly, the place of the dead. And that's all it is. Hades, Sheol means the place of the dead. Gehenna, on the other hand, was pretty much a valley where they would burn garbage. So as you could see, the dead, Gehenna, Hades, Sha'awal, place of the dead, and Gehenna, a place where they burnt garbage, they burnt criminals and dead animals. In some sources says that that Israel was burning their children there to Molech, and then that started to be incorporated in later use by the church to give this mythological place of a place that burns forever, where souls burn forever, as a mechanism of control. So it says key points on the meaning of Sheol. Etymology. The exact root of Sheol is uncertain, but many scholars connect it to a root meaning to ask, to inquire, or to demand. Yeah, because you have the word Sha'awal, and the word Sha'awal means to ask, reflecting the idea that Sheol is a place that demands or claims the dead. No, it's not. That's not. Well, yeah, it demands and claims the dead because that's the realm where they belong. That's how the Lord set it up. Did not he tell Adam, from dust thou art, and to dust shalt thou return? So that is all flesh right now is subjected to go to the grave. That's why when Yahweh Shai comes back, he says, that the last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. So if the last enemy that's going to be destroyed is death, and there's not going to be any death among the Israelites, how are we not going to live forever when the kingdom is established? So some propose a relation to Sha'al, meaning to ask, right? Sha'al, then you have Sha'awal, or to request, possibly pointing to the grave as the ever-hungry realm, always asking for more lives. Yeah, well, it says that. Hell is never full. It tells us that in the book of Proverbs. I'm not sure exactly where. The grave and something in hell are never full, meaning the grave where the dead go. They're always there. That's why scripture said about Esau that he is as death and can never be satisfied. Because death, is, there's people always dying, whether old or young. It says biblical usage. In the Hebrew Bible, Sheol is portrayed as the underground realm of the dead, a shadowy, silent place where all people go, both the righteous and the wicked. That goes with Job. And then it says, I believe it's in Psalms and in Isaiah, if I'm not mistaken, it says the grave cannot serve thee. The grave can't serve. When someone is dead, that body is dead. Their spirit is gone, so they cannot serve the Lord. That body is just a vessel or a suit of clothing that was established or set up and created for that particular spirit to be here. See? It says it is not a place of punishment or reward, but rather a neutral abode of the dead, unlike later ideas of heaven and hell. See, so you have to remember, these ideas came later. The concept of hell is more modernized. The concept of hell does not come from the Bible. The concept of hell was concocted by wicked individuals in the Roman Catholic Church using the Bible because they understood that if you said it was in the book, the people will believe it. Like my man Carnegie said in the movie Book of Eli. They'll believe it if it says it in the book. There's power in that book. And Esau understands that. These devils, these black devils in the Roman Catholic Church, going back to the church fathers, they understood that. And that's why they used it against the common people, because they were greedy. They just wanted to get paid. They were in the wicked Pharisees and Sadducees in them spirit. So it says descriptions often associated with darkness, silence, forgetfulness, and separation from the Most High. Yeah, so pretty much, it's just the body going to the earth, as it says in Ecclesiastes 12. Let's get that for those of you that may not be familiar with it. Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and verse 7. It says, then shall the dust return to the earth as it was. What is the dust? Meaning the body. From dust thou came, and to dust shalt thou return. And the spirit, which is the life force of the body, this is why we warm. Once the spirit, why do you think when people die, what sets in is what? Rigor mortis. What is rigor mortis? When the body tightens up. Why does the body tighten up? Because the heat of the body, that power pack of the spirit is gone. So the body just tightens up because there's nothing in the body to keep it alive so that everything can continue to move around. That's why rigor mortis sets in. And the body becomes cold because there's no spirit in it. It says, and the spirit shall return unto the Most High who gave it. So every spirit is what? Fire. The Lord says he's a consuming fire. Every spirit is made of fire. The angels are fire. So why would the Lord put a fire into fire to punish it? You see? So if you're a fire and they put you on fire, what is that going to do to harm you? Nothing. See? So it doesn't make sense. But what they're getting confused with or using as deception is when the scriptures speak about the lake of fire and the destruction that's coming. That's going to, be devastating. And they'll try to add that to something that's going to be forever, because the scriptures say that the fire that is not quenched. When you quench something, that means you're able to put it out. When you cannot quench something, what do? You have to let it burn out. And it could take a day, it could take a week, it could take a year, it could take forever. There's a place right now it's called Central Pennsylvania, that to this day, I believe it's 60 years later, is still burning. There were these underground, mines, and I believe it was a coal mine, if I'm not mistaken. And when something happened to where some fire had got started, and they tried to put it out and they weren't able to, and it just kept burning and burning. So they had to evacuate people in that area. And to this day, it's still burning. Because why? It has those natural resources under there that keep it going, and that's why America is going to burn for such a long time, because of all the oil and, the different resources and gases and propane and gasoline and everything else that's here. And it's going to burn for a long time. You got to remember, this is a big country. 5,000, it's like 3,000 miles, from east to west, and 2,000 miles from north to south. That's a lot of land. And if you've traveled out here, which I have, traveled on the roads, you see it's vast, and it's going to burn for a long time. So going back to the chat, it says, not hell. See, Sheol is not equivalent to hell as understood in later Christian theology. There's no burning fire or eternal torment in the original concept. And this is why you have to go to the original concept. You have to go down to the root of the matter. Because if you don't go down to the root of the matter, you're not going to understand when you read scriptures, when Yahushua spoke about, being burned, burning, and, the different symbols that Yahushua spoke of, and the apostle spoke of future judgment to come. All right. Like the scriptures say, the elements shall melt with fervent heat. This is the punishment or the second death that the Lord spoke of, that he would destroy this current system that we're living in. The final empire of the world, which is Esau's empire, is more like a common grave or underworld, much like the Greek concept of Hades, especially in its more neutral pre-Christian form. See? So everything pre-Christian, and when the word Christian came about, the word Christian was equated to the Israelites. Today they got it as a worldwide term, and when it was formed, that weren't teaching that. That came later through the so-called ecumenical councils, of the Roman Catholic Church. Your Nicene councils and your councils of Ephesus and the Council of Trent, and all these different councils that they had over the centuries. And it just kept building up, and they saw how lucrative it was. So, of course, that's when my man F. Murray Abrams said that. He said, fear, the greatest arsenal in God's weaponry. That's why the church created hell. See? So, it says, summary, the original meaning of Sheol in Hebrew is a shadowy subterranean place where the dead dwell, a kind of grave or realm of the dead, not necessarily a place, torment, or blessing, right? A place of torment or blessing. And it's not. You could take necessarily out of it. It's not a place of torment or blessing, because the dead are not tormented. They don't feel pain. The wicked are not being punished, and they cannot keep people, in captivity or subjection or oppression. So what I said, the next question I asked is, where did the concept of hell in Roman Catholic Church come from? Right? So now we're going to read this, but before we read this, because this brought it out, but there was a point that it didn't bring out because I asked the same question on my phone, right? And it gave me a little bit extra. So when we go to here, right, this was a conversation I had with chat. Right here, it says the concept of hell in the Roman Catholic Church is rooted in a combination of biblical texts, Jewish traditions, remember the traditions of men, early Christian theology, right, because it was built up, and later doctrinal development influenced by Greco-Roman thought. Here's a breakdown. So pretty much, I just wanted to get that because here it goes into it, but it didn't bring out the part of the influence of the Greco-Roman world. And when you understand the concept of hell and you understand Greek mythology and the Roman mythology, you could see how the Roman Catholic Church / so-called Christian, drew off of those teachings, drew off of that myth into the scriptures. This is why the Apostle Peter, which I'm going to read this again later, Lord's will, 2 Peter 1:16, it says, for we have not followed cunningly devised fables when we made known unto you the power and coming of our Lord Yahushua, but were eyewitnesses of his majesty, because you had a lot of different myths out there, that were being taught, especially among the Israelite foreigners, and those different circles among those different nations, the Greeks and the Romans and all of that. So going back, it says the concept of hell in the Roman Catholic Church is the result of a long development. So why do you have to have a long development of this concept when, if it was biblical, all you had to do was say, well, here it says so, such and such, and that's that. Because men, developed this over the centuries, over the different councils, the different reading of this scripture and that scripture, and twisting and contorting, just like they did with the situation with the Trinity. Trinity is not biblical. There was no mention of it in the scriptures, right? And then they pretty much either bribed or deceived Erasmus Desiderius, who was the translator of the Textus Receptus, into adding extra wording in 1 John 5, 7, and 8, and in his first and second edition of the Textus Receptus, he didn't use it. But then by the third one, he used it because they so-called back translated from the Latin into the Greek some manuscript. And they said, oh, we found one. You see? So it was a lie. So it says that draws on several sources, primarily Hebrew scripture, Greek philosophy. See, it keeps going back to Greek philosophy and Christian theological evolution. This is something that evolved over time through the cunningly devise fables of men. Matter of fact, I'm going to hold that. Let's go to, what is that? Is that Colossians 2 and 8? I haven't gone to this in a minute. Oh, no, that's Galatians. Salakia. Oops. Colossians 2 and 8. It says, beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy, see, and vain deceit. And that's what it is. After the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Yahushua HaMashiach. Right. And that's why they do that. It's about control. It's about power. It's about filthy lucre's sake. And they understood that fear could always be used as a weapon to get the people, the masses of people, to do what the Roman Catholic Church wanted them to do. So when we go back to Peter, 2 Peter 1 and 16, we're going to look up this word cunningly devised. And the cunningly devised is sophizo. That's where you get the word Sophia from. Or sophos, which means wise. Right? When we go through here, it says to make wise, teach. To become wise, to have understanding, to invent. So sophizo is an invention. Play the sophist. Now, a sophist was an individual that presented a very great argument. Sounded good. Even sounded almost believable. But when you start picking it apart, it didn't hold weight. And that's pretty much what we're finding out about the concept of hell. It doesn't hold weight. When you get outside of the fear tactic that was used in the deception, and you go into the root word of hell in both the Hebrew and the Greek, then you start to get a clearer understanding of what it means. There was a pastor, right? Elder Pastor speaks about him. He hasn't spoke about him in a while. I'm not sure of his name. He was a Jake, and he believed in the concept of hell at one point, but then his grandparents died and they weren't in the church. So he couldn't live with the fact that his grandparents were burning in hell. So it caused him to go and do research. And when he researched into the words of hell, so on and so forth, he found out that hell is a myth. It was just something that was invented because the scriptures don't speak about it. And when he presented that to his congregation, I believe a lot of them left because he brought out the truth. You might become your enemy because I tell you the truth. It says to devise cleverly or cunningly. So let's look up this word cunning, right? See what it means. Cunning. Having or showing skill in achieving one's ends by deceit or evasion. And that's what they do. It's deceit and it's evasion. Because they're stirring your mind away from the truth by this deception. All right? And when you get a chance, you could look up the word sophist, and you could see that it was a person that had, sophist was a fake wise man that presented a very good argument. He could deceive people, but when people start to pick through his argument, it falls apart under scrutiny. It says to render wise in a sinister acceptation, to form sophisms, an example, continue plausible error. And that's what it is. The Roman Catholic Church doctrine of hell is an error that was done that way on purpose through deception, and that error continues to this day. And when you wake up to it, they want to shove it down your throat because they're so used to the mechanism of control, they can't accept the fact that people woke up and are not trying to deal in that fashion anymore. They're not trying to deal in that fear. And that's why you see the younger generation of Jake not going to church like they did many generations before. Because they're seeing that their whole religious shit is bullshit. All of this stuff that they've been teaching is nonsense, because they have no answers. All they have is just song and dance, and fish fries with abominations there. They don't present any hope of the future. They don't present any, skills as far as breaking down the scriptures, dealing with prophecy to let us know where we at today in the world in comparison to what Yahweh Shai spoke of. It's all about fear, and it's all about, having a good time, dancing and acting a fool, having demons jump on you and you bouncing around like a goddamn bug out, and that's a highlight of people's life. And Jake goes there because Jake is wicked. And when they go there, they feel good. So they feel good about themselves. After a week of wickedness, that's the day when they can go and let some steam out. And then, I went to church, I gave tithes, and blah, blah, blah. So they feel good about themselves. So let's go back to the chat. So it says the concept of hell in the Roman Catholic Church is a result of a long development that draws on several sources, primarily Hebrew scripture, Greek philosophy, and Christian theological evolution. It evolved over time, over centuries. See? So this hell concept is something that has evolved over centuries. All right? Here's a breakdown where the Catholic concept of hell came from. Hebrew roots, Sheol. In the early Hebrew thought, Old Testament, the dead go to Sheol, a shadowy, which is Sheol, silent, neutral place. There is no clear distinction between the fate of the righteous and the wicked, because they both go to one place. Let's go to Ecclesiastes. There's a lot of nuggets in Ecclesiastes, 3rd chapter. Right, Ecclesiastes 3:19. For that which befalleth the sons of men, doesn't say wicked or righteous, right? Befalleth beasts, right? Same thing with the animals. Even one thing befalleth them. As the one dieth, so dieth the other. It doesn't make a distinction between wicked or evil or good. Yea, they have all one breath, so that a man had no preeminence above a beast, for all is vanity. It said, all go unto what? One place. And what's that one place? The grave. And then it said, then the spirit of man goes to the Father, but the spirit of animals stays on the earth, because animals were not given any form of law or any knowledge or understanding, to discern between good and evil. That's why they, act in a beastly, mindset, because they have no distinction between what's right and what's wrong. They just do whatever they have to do to survive. All are of the dust, and all turn to dust again. See? So let's go back. It says later Jewish writings, post-exilic, especially from the Second Temple period, began to show moral distinctions in the afterlife. Seeds of the idea that the wicked are punished and the righteous rewarded begin to appear in the texts like Daniel and the book of Enoch, which we don't deal with the book of Enoch because that's not the real book of Enoch, and influential non-canonical Jewish texts. See? So they'll try to use books like the book of Daniel, and this is a pseudo book of Enoch. Now there is a book of Enoch, but that's not the one. It says Greek influence, Hades and Tartarus, right? Because Tartarus is used once. That's in the book of 2 Peter, the 1st chapter, I believe, or 2 Peter, the 2nd chapter, which is another Greek word for the grave, pretty much. After Alexander the Great, Jewish or Israelite culture absorbed Greek ideas. Did you hear that? So when Yahushua was on the scene, the Israelites had already absorbed Greek ideas into what they were already teaching. So it was a slow, steady evolution. Greek mythology included Hades, the underworld, see, Greek mythology, and Tartarus, a place of punishment for the wicked, right? So now, I didn't look up this word here. We looked up the word cunningly devised, but I didn't look up the word fables. When you look up the word fables in the Greek is what? Muthos is where you get the word myth, right? A speech, word, saying, a narrative, story. That's all it is. These are stories that were put together. A true narrative, because you can have a true story of a true tradition, a true, reality. A fiction, a fable, see? An invention of falsehood. And that's pretty much what we see today. It's an invention of falsehood that has been evolving over the time when these different church fathers were in power. All right. Let me see. Perhaps from the same as through the idea of tuition, a tale, an example, fiction, myth, fable. All right. So let's go back. Greek mythology included Hades, the underworld, and Tartarus, the place of punishment of the wicked. These ideas blended with Israelite eschatology, meaning study of the end, beliefs about the end of the world and judgment. New Testament Gehenna. See, now we get into the heart of the matter. The majority of the times when Yahushua spoke about, the word hell, he said he used the word Gehenna as a symbol of the future judgment that was going to come. And that's talking about the second death or this lake of fire or the destruction by the nuclear missiles and the concentrated lasers from the chariots. Yahushua frequently refers to Gehenna as a place of fire and punishment. Example given, Matthew 10:28 and Mark 9:43. Right. And when you understand the concept of Gehenna, when you go to Jeremiah 7, we're going to, Lord's will get to that. This is pretty much a place in Israel where you had a garbage dump. And that garbage dump was kept, the fire was kept, it kept going because they kept throwing garbage in there. They kept the fire going. So the Lord was saying that when the destruction comes, it's going to be like Gehenna. It's going to be an everlasting, it's going to be a fire that's going to burn for a long time. It's not going to be quenched. But eventually it's going to go out because America is going to be set up and established as a monument of wickedness for all generations to come. So you have to read through here. It's Jeremiah 7:32. There's more up above it, but I'm just going to go straight here. It says, therefore, behold, the days come, saith the Lord Yahweh Bashem El Shai, that it shall no more be called Tophet, nor the valley of the son of Hinnom. Right, which that's what Hinnom is, where you get the word Hena, and Ga'ai, I believe it is where you get the word valley. That's where you got Gehenna in the Greek. They took both valley and Hinnom and put it together as a combination. So Gehenna is valley of Hinnom. But the valley of slaughter, why? Because the Lord is going to bring judgment there. For they shall bury in Tophet till there be no place. And that's why Yahweh shall use this place as a symbol of the future judgment that's coming. That wasn't a place of, of hell. That wasn't hell. That was an actual place in Jerusalem, in Israel, where they were burning garbage and all this stuff. And it burned continually. That's why the Lord used that as a symbol of the destruction that's coming. Because no one's going to be able to put this fire out. It's going to go out on its own. As to this fire, they had to keep it going. With the fire that the Lord's going to bring in America, Babylon the Great, that fire is eventually going to go out. And the carcasses of the people shall be meat for the fowls of the heaven and for the beasts of the earth, and none shall fray them away. Right, because this is, when the Babylonians came in, the Babylonian Empire came in and destroyed the southern kingdom. And they slaughtered a lot of them. It says, then will I cause to cease from the cities of Judah and from the streets of Jerusalem the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness. Why? Because the Lord is bringing judgment. This is why Yahushua used Gehenna as, a symbol of the great destruction that's coming later on. And it's talking about these times now. The voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride, for the land shall be desolate. So there's nowhere in here where it speaks about, eternal fire, eternal judgment forever. It's talking about the fires of Gehenna. All right. So going back, it says Gehenna was a valley outside Jerusalem, the valley of Hinnom, historically associated with child sacrifice, and later a garbage dump that burned continually. And in some sources, it says that, and when you read that chapter, it speaks about Jake burning their children to Molech. And in some sources, it said that even criminals were burnt there. Some sources bring it out, some sources deny it. It became a symbol of divine judgment. See? Because the Lord brought divine judgment by the mouth of his prophet Jeremiah and others upon Jake, back then the southern kingdom, that the Babylonian Empire was going to take them down if they didn't repent and turn back to the Lord. And that happened. So Yahushua is using that as a symbol of divine judgment, not as a symbol of a place where you burn forever. It's non-existent. It says Hades and Tartarus are also used in the New Testament, e.g., example given, Luke 16:23. This is the parable of the Lazarus and the rich man, and 2 Peter 2:4. Right, and this Tartarus is only used once here in 2 Peter 2:4. Showing influence from Greek ideas. See, showing influence from Greek ideas. Because what the apostles were doing was, especially the apostle Paul, he knew Greek. He understood about myths. So he would use certain things in Greek mythology or in the Greek sporting world or whatever the case may be, to give an example that they would understand. All right. It says in the New Testament, hell becomes more clearly defined as a place of eternal punishment for the wicked, especially after the final judgment. No, it doesn't. What it is it's a misconception of people's understanding of the word. But when you go back to the etymology of the words and the place where they came from, there's no indication of that. So when you read that, that's not talking about an eternal place of judgment. So it says church fathers and theological development. See, when something is developed, it's crafted over time. Early Christian thinkers like Augustine developed the doctrine of hell as eternal conscious punishment for unrepentant sinners, a just response to sin against an infinite power. Dante Alighieri's Inferno, 1300s, popularized the imagery of hell in the medieval imagination. The sleight of hand, the doctrines of men. But the church had already long accepted its basic theological framework, right? Because it was a development. It was a cunningly devised fable. What is that? Let me go back to Colossians. Oh, no. It's not going to let me do it that way. 2:8. Let's see. Vain deceit. Tradition of men. Or tradition is paradoxes. Giving up, giving over. The act of giving up, the surrender of cities, giving up, instruction, objectively, that which delivered, substance of. Objectively, that which is delivered, the substance of a teaching. Of who? Of men. That's why Yahushua said, that your fear towards me is taught by the precept of men. Of the body of precepts, especially ritual, which in the opinion of the later Jews were orally delivered by Moses and orally transmitted in unbroken succession to subsequent generations, which precepts, both illustrating and expanding the written law as they did, were to be obeyed with equal reverence. Right. So it's pretty much traditions that were passed down that were held in higher regard than the scriptures themselves and the laws of the Most High. And that's why Yahweh Shai said that. He said, your fear towards me is, towards the Most High is taught by the precept of men. You're not reverencing, you hold the traditions of the elders in higher regard than you hold the laws, statutes, and commandments of the Lord Yahweh B'Shem Shai. That's why he called them a bunch of hypocrites. Okay, so let's go back. So it says Catholic doctrine. The Catechism of the Catholic Church today teaches hell exists as a state of eternal separation from the Most High, chosen by those who freely and definitively reject him. And that's nowhere in the scripture about hell. It is not necessarily a literal fire and brimstone pit, but a spiritual reality of self-exclusion from communion with the Most High. Then they got a quote here from the Roman Catholic Church. So they're telling you without telling you. The church teaches that the Most High desires all to be saved, but respects human freedom. No, he doesn't. These guys, these. Anyways, let's go to Proverbs real quick to disprove that. Proverbs 24, is it in 20? Nope, 20 and 24. Let's go to Proverbs 20 and 24. It says, man's goings are of the Lord. How can a man then understand his own ways? So the Lord is not with the freedom of man to choose or whatever. Whatever you choose, whatever you do, is already ordained of the Lord for you to do it. You don't control your destiny. Jeremiah 10:23. Oh Yahweh B'Shem Shai, I know that the way of man is not in himself. It is not in man that walketh to direct his steps. Because the Lord is the one that directs man's steps. And he seals instructions. It says in Job 33, he seals the instructions of man in their mind, while they're sleeping. So going back, summary, the Catholic concept of hell evolved from Sheol, Hebrew Bible, Gehenna, Hades, Tartarus, New Testament with Jewish or Israelite and Greek influence. See, or the Israelite traditions of men and Greek influence. Keep remembering the Greek influence. Keep remembering the Hellenization of the Israelites. And you'll get a better understanding of why certain things are written in the New Testament and why they're written that way. Developed by church fathers like Augustine. See, it was developed, systematized in Catholic theology and doctrine. So this systematized pretty much is a systematic concept that was put together by cunningly devised fables. Systematic, relating to or consisting of a system. I hate when they presented or formulated, as a coherent body of ideas or principles. And that's what they did. They systematically sat down, same thing as cunningly devised fables, and concocted these ideas of how can we get more money from these people. Well, we've been building on this concept of hell. If we can really get that to stick into their mind, we could really, suck them dry. And then eventually, when people start, especially when people started, because, Jake, the scriptures say that Jake has a zeal for the Lord. So that zeal, you could use it against Jake. And that's what Esau did. That's what these church fathers did back then, these demonic Jake church fathers. They used the fear of Jake and their reverence to the Most High to drain them of their resources, their money, and all of that. And that's why hell was created. So it says systematized in Catholic theology and doctrine. That's it. It was made a system of a part of their teaching. It reflects both biblical teaching, no, it doesn't, and philosophical theological reasoning about justice, free will, and the nature of the Most High. Now, it's not. It doesn't reflect biblical teaching, but it does. They do use the scriptures because even the Apostle Paul said that. Galatians chapter 1, and this is why he was so adamant about continuously warning his flock that was given to him by the Lord Yahweh Bashem Shai to be careful, analyze things, be circumspect, look around, make sure that you're not getting caught up in this vanity. Make sure you're not being caught up in this world. You still have to function in it, but don't get caught up in it, because this world will suck you in and not allow you to do anything else but what the world does. There's an actual spirit out there that jumps on certain individuals. That's why we were speaking about the parable, of the sower seed. Those that fell upon the thorns. The cares of this life, choke the word and they become unfruitful. So this world could suck you in. So that's why the Apostle Paul was constantly, hammering, the followers of Yahweh Bashem Shai, to be careful of these things. So Galatians 1:6, it says, I marvel that you are so soon removed from him that called you into the grace of Yahweh Shai unto another gospel. Right? Back then you were, the wicked Pharisees and them were trying to convert these Gentiles, which are Israelite foreigners, to get circumcised, and not to, and pretty much throw Yahweh Shai out. Which is not another, right? Because they're not using another Bible. They're using the same Bible, the same scriptures, but there'll be some that trouble you. But there's some that use that against you and trouble you with it. That's why they'll put more, worries on you than you should have. Our worry should be to just, what is the whole duty of man? Please, to serve the Lord, pretty much. Of course we have fear and reverence to Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. But they use that fear through the hell doctrine to control the people. And that was oppression. So it says, but though we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel unto you than that which we have preached unto you, let him be accursed. All right. And accursed means set aside for judgment. You have a sacrifice, and you had a sacrifice that was already prepped, set aside. Okay, this is going to be for so and so and such and such. And it was set aside pretty much waiting, which it didn't even know, waiting, to be for the day it was sacrificed. That's what these people are. They're set aside for judgment, So going back, so the last thing I asked is the concept of hell a myth? Whether the concept of hell is a myth depends on how you define myth and the perspective you're coming from, religious, historical, or philosophical. Let's break it down. What do you mean by myth? In popular usage, myth often means false belief. That's it, or fiction. It's a false belief. It says in academic or literary terms, a myth is a narrative that expresses deep cultural or spiritual truths, regardless of whether it is literally true. See? So it's not really, it doesn't matter if it's true or not, which is not. It's just, something, it's an expression that people use in the these different myths, the Greek or Greco-Roman myths, right? That were used to be brought into and combined with the scriptures. Now we know you can't combine the scriptures with any other book or any other thought out there. Let's go to Isaiah 34:16. It says, seek ye out of the book of the Lord and read. What is the book of the Lord? The Bible, right? No one of these shall fail, meaning the prophecies will not fail. None shall want her mate. You're not going to be able to mate this book with anything else. For my mouth he hath commanded, and his spirit he hath gathered them. Right, because the Bible is enough. You don't need all those extra resources and extra biblical resources to prove the scriptures. Now, sometimes we go into like icons and historical events that may not be written of in the scriptures, but should I say written in the scriptures, but not plainly. So we use certain things in history, like in the Byzantine Empire, the Renaissance period, to show you that, look, this is what this is speaking about here in the book of Revelation 20, or in the book of so and so and such and such. The history of the Ptolemaic dynasty and the Seleucid dynasty and the Hellenization of Israel. The only place that it really goes in depth with that is in the Apocrypha. That's why the Apocrypha is needed, to understand what happened to the Israelites between the time of Malachi and the time of the New Testament. See, because there's, like somebody said it, I'm not sure if that was Elder Yashawamba, one of the other elders out there, said that, the period of the Greeks, what happened during that period, it was, I forget exactly how they worded it, but something along those lines. Because if you don't understand that history, you're not going to be able to understand why the scriptures sometimes they use Gentiles, sometimes they use the word Greek or Greeks. See? And by this point in the New Testament, when or should I say, the first century AD, right? Israel was well acquainted with the Hellenization period, and they were well acquainted with the sellouts that they looked down upon, the Israelites that were calling themselves Greeks. And they knew that some of them were Hellenistas that spoke the Greek language and came to Jerusalem to worship and to keep the law, statutes, and commandments. And they understood the ones that totally fell away and didn't want nothing to do with Israel, and that totally forgot about Israel. And they looked at them with great disdain because they were nothing but heathens in their mind. But among them, you had some, that you had some that were a part of the Lord's, elect. And that's why you had the Apostle Paul going to teach them, to gather the elect from among the Israelite foreigners, so that later on, in these times now, all Israel would be saved. Because you had elect from both sides, the circumcision and the uncircumcision. And this time we have the elect. The elect, when the elect are saved and the non-elect are destroyed, then in the kingdom, the ones that are destroyed here will come back to the ones that make it. It says, for my mouth I have commanded, and his spirit hath gathered them. So let's go back. So calling hell a myth doesn't necessarily mean it's a false. It may mean it's a symbolic framework for understanding things like justice, evil, or the afterlife. Hell has nothing to do with justice or evil. Hell is just simply a grave. When you read up above, we just read that it's talking about the grave. All right? There's no afterlife in hell. The body goes into the earth and it decomposes. And that decomposition, when it breaks down, it feeds the nutrients of the earth so that it can gather or pull from that, because everything is set up perfectly. When an animal dies or a person dies, their body feeds the earth. You see, the way the Lord set everything up is a perfect synergy. So it says religious perspective for believers in Catholicism, Orthodoxy, Islam, and many Protestant denominations. Hell is believed to be real, either as a literal place of punishment or a spiritual state of eternal separation from the Most High. For non-believers, many people, especially secular or humanist thinkers, view hell as a man-made concept. It is a man-made concept. When you go back to the etymology of the word. That's why it's important to go back to the etymology. It says, a tool for social control, a response to human fears about death, justice, and evil, right? Because everyone has that fear, you know, of the unknown, of dying, you know. But we understand death, but the flesh is still, like, you still have that, you know, a symbolic warning rather than a metaphysical reality. Historical and anthropological view, which is a study of man, almost every culture had a concept of some kind of underworld or place of punishment. Example given: Hades, Naraka, Duat. This suggests that the idea of hell reflects universal human concerns, fear of death, need for justice, anxiety about morality, serves a social and psychological function, even if it's not literally real. Yeah. And that's why they say, see, with Esau, when Esau does things, to give you an example, he'll throw things out as a suggestion just to see what the reaction of the people is going to be. He doesn't necessarily throw something out, and expect it to just catch right away. It's just little subtleties, little here, little there, something called gradualism. And before you know it, when you got the majority of the people believing those little subtleties that you threw out there, then you got the majority of the world in deception. But you're not going to get the elect to follow that or fall for that. And even if the elect may seem to be drawn by that, the Lord's going to make a way for them to break away from it. Because we were all in the world at one time. We all believed, that the Lord, so-called, the Heavenly Father was so-called white, and so on and so forth. We believed in, all these different things that the church was teaching until the Lord woke us up. And then we started, he started to work with our minds from the teachers that we had, and the studying, the tools that our teachers, put in us, so to speak, or drew out of us, to be able to look into these things and to examine. And that's what happens with a lot of these jakes in the church. Their spirit is not about examination. Their spirit is just about acceptance to whatever the pastor says or whatever the church says. You see, they're sheep. It says, so from this angle, hell is a myth in the archetypal sense, a powerful story to explain deep human questions, philosophical and theological critiques. Thinkers like Origen, early church, Gregory of Nyssa, and more recently C.S. Lewis have argued against the idea of eternal conscious torment. And this is why some of these church fathers that stood against, the majority consensus were demonized. You see, they were demonized. Why? Because that wasn't the accepted thing. So whenever the minority believed in something, but the majority believed in something else, they would look down on the minority, because the minority were more tapped into a more critical way of thinking than the masses of the people. It says, offering alternative interpretations, example given, universal reconciliation or hell as self-chosen separation. Modern theology often treats hell less literally, more as a state of being than a fiery pit. Right. And you could have, a state of being like, if like Yahushua spoke about Capernaum, right? In Matthew the 11th chapter. I'm not sure if he mentioned it anywhere else, but in Matthew the 11th chapter, right? Right here, Matthew 11:23, and thou Capernaum, which are exalted unto heaven. You could have a heavenly state of being, of living good, having everything, having no want or lack of anything, being, lucrative, right? It says, shall be brought down to hell. You're going to be brought down to, if you imagine going from that state to being homeless, a bum on the street with nothing, panhandling. That's two extremes. You're going from being pampered, having everything, to having nothing, having to beg for everything, So it can be a condition, but it's really referring to, the It's really referring to um, the grave. All right, so modern theology often treats hell less literally, more as a state of being than a fiery pit. Final thought. So is hell a myth? It depends on what you're asking. Question. Is hell a literal place of eternal fire? Answer. Maybe. No, it's not. If you accept traditional religious doctrine. And see, it ties it back to traditional religious doctrine, which we read that had influence, Greco-Roman influence. And it was an evolution over time. So it says, is hell a symbolic or spiritual concept? Yes, many traditions and theologians interpret it this way. So even among theologists, they don't all agree that hell is an actual place. Some say it is, some say it's not. Some say it's a state of mind. Is hell a cultural myth humans created to explain justice and fear of death? Yes, if you view religion through a secular, historical, or psychological lens, right? Because if you look back at history, you look back at the etymology of the words hell and all of that, right? Both in Greek and Hebrew, you find out that it's the grave. You find out that through our history, there were the church fathers borrowed from different mythological, stories. Bottom line, hell can be seen as a myth, a metaphysical belief, or a spiritual reality, depending on your worldview. Right. And when we go, you type in the word hell, right? And we go to the New Testament. It first appears in the New Testament in Matthew. Right. Matthew chapter 5. Right. And verse 22, it says, but I say unto you that whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment, right, destruction. Whosoever shall say to his brother, Raka, or Raka, shall be in danger of the council. But whosoever shall say, thou fool, shall be in danger of hellfire, right? And this is Yahweh speaking. Let's go get the red letter. Boom, right? Let's go to the word hell. Hell. Right? Matter of fact, let's go back to the word fire, pyre, or pur, fire, which means what? When we view it, we see it, as the destruction of America, because that's what scriptures say, the lake of fire, and we understand what that means. These people look at the word fire and get all, this fire goes back to what? The fires of Gehenna, which was not a mythological place you go to and burn. It was an actual place, in Jerusalem, right? Outside of Jerusalem, that they burned garbage. Jake sacrificed their children to Molech, and some sources, they say criminals were burnt there. Right here it says Gehenna. Hell in the place of the future. Hell is the place of the future punishment called Gehenna, or Gehenna of fire. This was originally the valley of Hinnom, south of Jerusalem. So when did that change? That changed with the evolution of the Roman Catholic Church and the early church fathers and their councils. It says, where the filth and dead animals of the city were cast out and burned. See? A fit symbol of the wicked and their future destruction, right? And that's the future destruction. When we read, I'm going to come back to that. When we read Revelation 21 and 8, right? It says, but the fearful and unbelieving and the abominable and murderers and whoremongers and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death, right? In other words, when America is totally engulfed in flames, these individuals like this are not going to make it out of here. They're going to be burnt up in America, the lake of fire, not no river of fire. So that's what the word Gehenna means, right? Gehenna. Now, when you look at the root word, it goes to the Hebrew origin. So the Greek words in the New Testament go back to the Hebrew words in the Old Testament. And it's a compound word, Gaya'ah, which is valley, and Hanam, which is Hinnom. See? Gehenna, Gaya'ah, Hanam. Gehenna. See? Nothing about a place of eternal, everlasting punishment, which they say here, but that's not what it's talking about. When you go back to the origins of it. And what does, because people look at the word hell and they're like, oh, hell, oh my God. But what is that word in its original language? Gehenna. What does Gehenna go back to? Gehenna goes back to the Old Testament, the Valley of Hinnom. What was the Valley of Hinnom about? It was a garbage dump where they burned trash and they burned children and they burned criminals. It's not no fiery place where in the middle of the earth somewhere or wherever that you go and burn forever. And in Mark, the 9th chapter, right? Because the IUIC tries to use this scripture. Right. And if thy hand offend thee, Mark 9:43, cut it off, for it is better for thee to enter into life maimed than having 2 hands to go into hell, into the fire that never shall be quenched. Right. So this part here, when it's talking about thy right hand offend thee, cut it off, it's not talking about literal. That means if you have an individual that is in the knowledge and they happen to go rogue and you try to salvage them, through the spirit and power of Yahweh Shemal Shai in hopes that they regain themselves, and they don't, then you have to cut them off. You all right? Because it's better to cut that off and have a part missing from you, somebody you might have been close to, right? Than to be whole and be destroyed like them. And when it says until the fire that never shall be quenched, the elder pastor broke it down. It's not when you quench something, you extinguish it. This fire would not be able to be extinguished. The word is asbestos. It's not going to be able to be extinguished, unquenched, unquenchable, of eternal hellfire to punish the damned. No, this is bullshit. It's unquenched, unquenchable. Because when you actually look up the word quench, right? Matter of fact, let me go up here, get it up here, so I could just get quench, right? Quench definition, right? Satisfy one's thirst by drinking. Extinguish a fire. You're not going to be able to extinguish that fire. That's all it means. Because it's going to go up forever and ever for a long time. Then eventually in process of time, it'll go out. All right. Let's see something. Let me go back. Let me see something. Just bear with me. All right, and it keeps using the word quenched. Unquenchable, shall never be quenched or unquenchable, because you won't be able to put it out. You won't be able to extinguish it. Bottom line. All right. And then you have the other word for hell. Let's see. There's another word for hell, which is Hades. And I can't. There's a way you can Strong's number. Beautiful. Okay, let's see. 10. Here we go. This one here, Luke 10:15. And we just read it. And thou Capernaum, which are exalted to heaven, shall be thrust down to hell. Meaning what? To the grave. Meaning to a lower condition. Because the grave is the lowest condition you can go to, right there. Hell, Hades. Name of Hades or Pluto, the god of the lower regions. Orcus. These are all Greek mythologies. The netherworld, the realm of the dead. Later use of this word, the grave, death, hell. See? And it just means grave. But the hell was added there. In biblical Greek, it is associated with Orcus, the infernal region, a dark and dismal place in the very depths of the earth. The common receptacle of disembodied spirits, usually Hades, is just the abode of the wicked, uncomfortable place. Yeah, and this is a very uncomfortable. This it's not an uncomfortable place. It's just a grave. Let's go to Job. An uncomfortable place. But that's what Esau says. Job chapter 3 and verse 13. And you got to remember, look at it from the perspective of Job, and he was catching hell. He just wanted to die. He was tired of catching hell. He just wanted to die. He said, fuck it, I'd rather just be dead than fucking with this shit. Hey, what the scripture say? That death is better than continual sickness? Job 3 and 11. Why died I not from the womb? Why did not I give up the spirit when I came out of the belly? Why did the knees prevent me? Or why the breast that I should suck? For now should I have lain still and been quiet. I should have slept, then had I been at rest. See, here it's saying, oh no, it's a very uncomfortable place. How is it an uncomfortable place when you're resting? The body is just decomposing. You don't feel anything. The spirit has already gone out of that body. It's back up in the heavens with the Lord. So it says here, the dead, the place of death, the abode of the dead, Sheol, with kings and counselors of the earth, right? You have righteous kings, you have wicked kings. It then distinguished between either one, which built desolate places for themselves, like the pharaohs, or with princes that had gold who filled their houses with silver. Yeah, because the pharaohs used to do that. You know, they used to, those big pyramids, they would fill it with treasures. They would fill it with their, concubines or whatever and their servants, because they're thinking that when they die and they go into the afterlife, they're going to still have that same position. And they were wrong, G. Or as a hidden untimely birth that I had not been, as infants which never saw light. There, meaning where? In the grave, the wicked cease from troubling. And there the weary be at rest, right? Because all souls belong to the Lord. So all of the people on the earth, their spirit, when they die, goes up to the heavens to be judged by the Father. There the prisoners rest together. They hear the word of, they hear not the voice of the oppressor, right? So that's why you rather die. You don't have to be a slave. You don't have to be constantly in sickness. It says, the small and great are there, and the servant is free from his master. Wherefore is light given to him that is in misery, and life unto the bitter in soul. See? Which long for death, but it cometh not, and dig for it more than for her treasure. Right? Because this is why you have people that are so depressed that they rather just end their life. Because they don't like, the way they feel. They don't like that feeling of depression. Or some people that are sick take their life because they're tired of the pain. It says, which rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they can find the grave. See? So when you look up this word grave, you have the word, sometimes they use the word grave, sometimes they use the word hell. In this case, the word grave is kobar, grave, sepulchre, tomb. And then there's other times when you have the word Hades. I'm sorry, yeah, that's the Hades is the Greek. So the Hebrew word is kobar. So kobar would be another way of saying grave. Like you have the word sha'awal or sha'al. Let me see something. Grave. Let me see something. Right. So in this case here, Genesis 37:35, and all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, "For I will go down." This is dealing with Jacob when they told him that Joseph, was probably mauled by an animal, into the grave, and unto my son, mourning thus his father wept for him. And when you look up that word grave, Sha'awal, that's all it means. It's the grave. Hades, or the world of the dead, as if a subterranean retreat, including its accessories and inmates, grave, hell, pit. That's all it is. It's just a grave. It has nothing to do with a place where you go and burn forever. That's connected to myths. All right. And like we read earlier in 2 Peter 1, it says, "We have not followed cunningly devised fables when we made known unto you the coming of our Lord Yahushua." So with that, I pray that you brothers and few sisters have been edified. Till the next time I say, Shalom.